all, welcome. We'll give people some time to jump on. Hi there, welcome. We'll give people a few moments to jump on. You're all gonna hear me say that a couple of times. Hi there, welcome. Hello, welcome. Hi, Frank.
Hello, Alex.
I'm glad you're back for round two.
Yeah, appreciate it. Just getting fine tuned with your wisdom and advice. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm gonna give this a couple more minutes to see who else hops on before I get started. Thank you all for being here.
Alex,
Yep.
this is Graylin Pressspray. I,
Hi. Good to hear
I
from you.
yes, unfortunately, I have a meeting at 7, and I
Mhm.
got a hard stop at like 6:45. Will this be recorded?
Yes,
Is
it's
this
being
something
recorded, and we'll get through most of the material well before you have to jump off, so don't worry about that.
Thanks.
Of course. Okay, I am going to get started so that we don't keep you any longer than we need to. All right. So I have shared my screen. If someone can confirm that they can see that, that would be awesome. Um,
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Welcome to an oversight training. My name is Alex Baca. I'm the DC Policy Director at Greater Washington. Some of you were here. I last gave this training 2 years ago. We skipped last year because it was really busy. I don't know. But oversight is one of my sort of favorite things to talk about. So thank you so much for being here today. So let me get started. Yeah, hello, thanks for being here. Hi, Garrett, thanks for joining us. If you're not super familiar with Greater Washington, we work on land use, housing, and transportation policy in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. I'm the DC Policy Director, so I work on this stuff in the district specifically. A lot of you might be familiar with our publication, which is ggwash.org, with our policy team, which is me and Dan Reed, Caitlin Roger, Kai Hall. The blog is one of our tools to advance our goals. More traditional policy work, like writing and delivering testimony to a legislative body, which we will be talking about tonight, is another. Our goals are broadly to enable more housing and more affordable housing in the district, frequent and reliable transportation, fewer trips by car, and the fair share of land uses. But this event is not about getting you to say the same thing as us. I want to impress this point because it's great if you agree with us. It's also totally fine if you don't. I think everyone should be able to testify at hearings, and that's what we're talking about today. I am happy to talk about Greater Washington's priorities at the end if you're interested, but mostly this is just about what I've learned over the past 5 years in this role, and sharing that with you all. So this is roughly our order of operations. I'm not super committed to this. I'm gonna talk, I have slides, put questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to integrate them. If I don't get to them, like, we'll get there eventually. I am working with 2 screens right now, so bear with me because it's a little bit hard to toggle between the 2 of them and also run the slides. But just get my attention if you need anything in particular. Oh yeah, I have this scheduled from 6 to 8, but I really don't anticipate that we will be on until 8 p.m. unless you all have a ton of stuff to talk about, in which case, like, I am happy to be here as long as you need. These are my plans for the evening. We will record this, we will post it, we will distribute it via email, it will be on our website, and you can always email me. I'll share my email address at the end if you have any questions. A couple things on the agenda tonight. We have some basics, which I like to call the existential considerations of performance oversight. We'll talk about what to expect when you're testifying. We'll talk about writing testimony, and we're going to talk about how to sign up at the very end. And the explicit reason for this is that signing up is actually really complicated, and we could spend an hour just on that, but there's a lot of material that I want to get through. And I think it's more of value to do some actual tech support for signing up for hearings once we've gotten through the sort of what is oversight and had a discussion about that. So I will get there, but I humbly request that you sort of keep your questions around the content that I'm presenting, knowing that we're going to get to this, like, how to sign up last. So thank you. I am pulling the tab up so I can see things you say. So, okay, basics. What is performance oversight? The DC Council has a definition of this. It is, in preparation for each agency performance and budget oversight hearing, Council committees, as all government agencies, a series of detailed questions about performance, employees, services, spending, and accounting practices. Agencies submit their responses in advance of the hearing so that the Council can have as much background as possible on the agency's operations and expenditures when questioning department heads and other key witnesses. Lovely stuff, right? Slide deck. So I would tell you that the DC Council's #1 job is passing a balanced budget. That's what our legislature does. I would also tell you that money solves most things, but not everything. Oversight is how you get into the guts of agencies and figure out what they are and aren't doing and why, which is really important to actually implementing policy. So that's why I like it. I think it's really interesting. I think it is an underrated feature of participating in local advocacy. Performance oversight is sort of based on the dynamic of our 2 branches of government, right? Council committees, council, legislative branch, oversee administrative departments. That's the mayor, that's the executive branch. Council committees are chaired by council members. They have staffers who work on those committees. There are a lot of agencies and offices. So for example here, getting out of this really quickly, if you are looking at, say, since I know a lot of people here are concerned with transportation, if you take a look at the T&E committee's page, which tells you who chairs it, Ward 6 Councilmember Charles Allen. It tells you the council members on it. It tells you the staffers. They do really hard work. Be nice to them. They'll answer your questions for the most part. And then you get to see all of these agencies that are under this committee, and that is a bunch of agencies. It's never just one, even though, typically we associate transportation and the environment with like DDOT and with DOE. Those are certainly big agencies and they take up a chunk of time, but they are certainly not the sum total of the committee's portfolio, and staffers are working on a lot. So keep that in mind. Oversight hearings are about January through March, and budget hearings begin in March. Performance oversight is a nice tee up to budget because it reflects if things should be funded or not, if they're effective, if they're doing what they're supposed to do. Do they need more money? Do they need less money? Do they need more people? Do they need better management? It's important to know this stuff before budget starts. So I'm going to skip this for a second. And I just want to say that like oversight is a process. There are multiple ways for a public witness, which is you, to work into the oversight process. The thing we're talking about today is actually testifying. There's a couple of other outstanding ways to be involved with this that are mostly tied to pre-hearing questions, which are questions that agencies submit in advance to the, or that the council submits in advance to agencies that they have oversight over. So back to this, right? This is mostly, the idea is to get a lot of basic questions covered, right? Like how many employees are dedicated to this, or was this fund spent, or whatever. Most committees formulate pre-hearing questions. If their staff really does this, it's not necessarily council members. Some will go back and forth with agencies for more information. And this is all happening before the actual hearings. So the reason that I paused on this is that previously this lived in one place on the council website. And now it lives in this brand new hearing management system that we're going to talk about later because it's kind of confusing. But the practice of pre-hearing questions is still very much alive and important to how oversight works, because it really does sort of clear the way for I'm sorry, it does really clear the way for more complex questions to be asked, which is really important because I think that's really where the meat of this is. Meat stuff, that's not great. So I do want to, reiterate that oversight is a process. Actually testifying, which we're talking about tonight, is a big component of that. But there's also, just generally asking questions, corresponding with the committee, asking agencies directly. Like there's a whole bunch of different ways to provide quote unquote oversight, right, on an agency. So what to expect when you're testifying. And for those who just recently joined us, I want to tell you that we will be talking about how to sign up to testify at the very end, because that often takes a little bit of time and I want to get through some of the more just general like stage setting, I guess, for oversight before we jump into that. So what's your role in performance oversight? Everyone's a public witness. I'm a public witness, regardless of, what my job is. You all are public witnesses, right? Like that's our role in this. What that means is that we can sort of be another pair of eyes on an agency's work. We can give examples of why something is or isn't working. We can provide a different viewpoint. No one is infallible. This includes council members and their staff, right? Sometimes it's really easy to think, oh, like they're the government, this is their full-time jobs, they're supposed to know everything. And I have an enormous amount of respect for our council and their staffers, but they might miss something. They have a lot of work to do. Again, they have all those agencies to cover, and public witnesses can really help in advancing a conversation or a line of questioning that might not otherwise have come up. I really recommend not throwing yourself at every hearing or every issue. You do not need to say everything about everything. I really recommend picking your battles. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that later. Because ultimately you are really working within the system. And this training is about how to be most effective within the system, right? This is literally a part of the process. It is a process. It's very, I don't even want to say technical and in the weeds. It is just a part of what the council does as its job. And so the best thing you can do is sort of be detailed and specific in what you're doing to sort of support the outcomes that you want to see and support the people who work on those issues. So, you know, actual details. Like I said, all those agencies and offices, there's a lot of hearings. Most council members, besides the one chairing the hearing, will probably not show up to the hearing. That's normal. That does not mean you are being snubbed. That does not mean your issue is being snubbed. It just means that there is a lot going on. And the chair of the hearing, who's usually the chair of the committee that the agency having a hearing is in, is kind of the most important audience anyway. Agencies and offices have directors. Those are typically the government witnesses. It is certainly possible for a witness to not be the director of an agency. And often if agencies have interims or acting directors, like they'll be there. But those directors are typically the government witnesses. That doesn't mean anything shady. It just, that is the person who is typically supposed to testify. After you sign up, you'll be added to the witness list. You'll get a witness list about 24 hours before the hearing. You can see your place in line. Witnesses are split into panels or groups. If you can't make it, email the committee ASAP and let them know. It's just a sort of courtesy, and it's helpful for other people to get that witness list and be able to sort of time out where they will be and have a sense of where they are in the order. So just as a general, it's respectful to let someone know if you can't make it, right? So same thing goes for testifying. I strongly recommend submitting your written testimony in advance of the hearing. 24 hours ahead is preferred. Morning of is okay. Nobody's gonna freak out if you do that. Different council members have different preferences for how they follow written testimony while witnesses are speaking. Others don't care, and others are going to be listening to you and making notes as you say things and looking at your written testimony later. There are 13 council members. That's 13 different ways of doing things, right? So, but I do think it is good practice to get your testimony in 24 hours ahead of time, and then you also don't have to worry about submitting it before the records close. And records close at different durations after hearings. It's really annoying. There's different committees, they have different rules. It is like that. And you just have to be mindful of that. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. There is, the way this typically works is there's, council members will open the hearing. They'll give remarks. Council members on the committee may make an appearance or not. Council members may or may not make it to all these hearings, right? They will typically ask questions of the first few panels and drop off from doing so after that, especially if it's like a really long witness list, right? If you are asked a question, which is a sort of essential component of this, right, is asking witnesses questions after they've delivered testimony. If you don't know the answer, that's okay. Just say you don't know how to answer. You can always follow it via email. But if you do know the answer, go ahead and share it. Or if you have a thought of where someone might look to find the answer, go ahead and say it. So writing testimony. What makes for good testimony? I have sort of divided this section up into strategy and content. There's a couple different sort of ways to do this, and then what you actually want to like include in things. So keep it short. I cannot emphasize this enough. Public witnesses have 3 minutes to testify, and public witnesses representing an organization have 5. I think I know most of you on this call. You would be public witnesses. You're about 3 minutes. I work for an advocacy organization, so I'm special. I get 5. That said, I try to keep my testimony under 3 minutes, even representing an organization, because 3 minutes is totally enough time to make your point. I promise. If you cannot make it in 3 minutes, then I think that's where we can go into some workshopping, and I'm happy to help you. And you always are able to submit longer testimony in writing, which is something I do all the time. And you can always say, please refer to my written testimony for more detail. Part of the way to help with this is you do not need to go into a preamble about your name and your affiliation. You don't really need to describe what your organization does or what you do. And while it's nice to give honorifics and greetings and thank council members, you can keep it short because you really do need to be spending that time on like the actual components of your testimony. Some committees have changed up the way that they've done this standard 3 minutes as individuals and 5 minutes as organizations. The housing committee, I think, typically gives like 4 minutes to everybody. Sometimes there's a difference for advisory neighborhood commissioners. Again, stuff varies by committee, but this is the general rule. And this is generally why I advise everyone, including myself, to keep my testimony to 3 minutes. It's definitely doable. Let's see. Oh, okay. Choose your fighter. So I was looking for something cute for this, and there's a song from the Barbie movie called Choose Your Fighter. Perfect for me. So this is the DC Council seal, in case you were wondering. So choose your fighter. This is a little thing I put together when I did this 2 years ago. It went over really well. I'm subjecting you all to it again. So I think there's about 3 different ways to handle your testimony. First way is being a supporter. You like something and you want to see more of it, or you support something and you want it to be better, so you have constructive criticism. Support is really, really, really underrated. Council members and agencies rarely hear that things are working well, and they more frequently hear opposition to what they are doing than they hear support for it. So supporting something, especially something perceived as controversial, is just as important as identifying flaws in policy. The illustration for this is AI generation for when you ask for supporter. So, you know, an evolution in the past 2 years is the ability to add really funny graphics to my training slide decks. So I often find myself in the role of supporting something, right? Is that because I work on this full time, I get to see a lot of stuff that like is actually working better than the general public might understand. And it is really important to say that things are working well when they are. We try not to be sycophantic, but like it is really important and it does make a difference. Tone setting, you know, again, God bless AI. You have something on your mind and you don't know what the solution is, but you want the government to know about it. Telling a compelling story that clearly identifies a problem can activate the council to use its own expertise to support something or use its powers to identify and implement the solution. This is a pretty good place to be if you're a public witness not working for an advocacy organization and you want to get involved or you want to tell the government something, right? And you don't exactly know the solution. That's okay. You will want to sort of amplify this with personal experience, data if you have it. I don't recommend bringing like total personal grievances to the council, but this, especially personal experiences, can be really informative in helping the like decision makers and their staff figure out what to do about a problem that you've identified. Last is government knower. And I know some of you on this call are government knowers, and I really respect that. If you're testifying on an agency, you probably know a lot about it and you have really specific questions. You do not need to be a paid advocate to be an expert by any means. I would say by the time you're in this category, you really need to know what you're talking about. I would say a good test of this is if you've ever looked at an agency's org chart, you are a government knower. Lean into it. I definitely recommend that. This is my cat. This is not a fighter. This is when you just are worn out and really have decided that you don't want to testify on anything. And you know, that's okay too. Sometimes it's not the time. So the big thing is being clear and direct, right? Again, you have presumably 3 minutes. You do not need to deliver a thesis. Every single one of these types that I have identified, keep it short. I cannot emphasize that enough. Give examples. Government knowers can sort of get out of the example territory, but for supporters and tone setters, you will really want to talk about something specific. Do not be general. It is really not helpful. And if someone's trying to like figure out what you mean, then that's not really gonna help change things, right? So for supporters, give an example of something that's working well. An example from the work that I do, right, is that we have been pretty happy with how the bus priority program under DDOT has been working. That is not to say it is a perfect program. It is not to say that everyone is happy with it. it is to say that the way this has been sort of the way projects have been implemented at DDOT, the way the team is structured at DDOT has been really to our satisfaction and our liking. We will certainly have constructive criticism about it, but that's something that the tone of our testimony has in past years been really favorable towards, because we think it's a good thing. We want to see more of it, even if there are necessarily changes to be made to improve it. So, some of those suggested improvements, like, could go into, more emails to people signed up to lists about the project, right? Or more graphics for ANCs to present to their constituents. Whatever, those are purely examples, but that is within the context of, we support this program. This is a good thing. Please do more of it. Please continue to support it as the council. Tone setting, if you're frustrated, this is a little bit of the inverse, right? It's just like, this isn't working. I'm really frustrated about it. I don't know what to do, and I want you to fix it. But you can't sort of go in there, necessarily unfairly expecting things to be fixed overnight. And again, the more examples that you can give, the better. I have sent in some things in the past, actually not on behalf of Juju Wash, but like for my own sort of interests, right? Of like, my 311 request didn't work out. I just want to show like screenshots of the trajectory and how something got closed before it was actually resolved, right? And I don't specifically have a fix for that, but it does seem like something useful for the committee to know. And so it's worth submitting. I do spend a lot of my time, unsurprisingly, in the government number territory. That's, you've read the pre-hearing questions, act like it, build upon them, ask questions. Asking questions is really important and can sort of help the committee advance what they are trying to do. This is the most depressing slide, but I hope it frees you from some of the burdens of participating in public processes. Lower your expectations. Agencies are really big and really complicated. You're a public witness. You're several layers removed from direct action. You are working within the system. Really good oversight often takes several years, especially if it is changing the function of a division at an agency or the way a program works, or fixing flaws in a program that have been going on for a while. You're not really going to get directors saying, that is such a good idea, I'm going to do that tomorrow. Like, that's not how most people's workplaces work, to be fair. But the flip side of this is that this is exactly why you should testify. If you want to see change, you need a steady drumbeat of feedback over the years. No one can do that forever. Testifying when you can and testifying well when you do is important. I like to think of this as us all sharing the labor of participating in performance oversight, which sounds really corny, but matters a lot. I had mentioned earlier, I've been at Greater Washington for 5 years. I've worked for a lot of nonprofits in DC. I can look at stuff that prior workplaces of mine were doing when I was there like 10, 12 years ago that have changed. And that's really powerful. That's really, really cool. But it wouldn't have happened without people speaking up and being involved, and it not just being sort of confined to one organization or one witness. So it is important that we all participate in this and participate well. I bet no one can wait to do this thing that I just talked about, because I made it sound kind of depressing and complicated. So I have a couple of suggested lines of inquiry for your testimony. Retrospective, did the thing that you asked for happen? Did something get messed up? How is it going to be fixed? I think this is pretty good for all 3 testimony types, right? So one of the things that I will be spending a lot of my energy on this year with my oversight testimony is talking about a study that was funded in 2019 that still has not been released, or a contract has not been executed to update it. This is a real, did this thing happen? And how is the committee going to fix it? Or how is the agency going to fix it? What are the solutions to that? I don't know the answers to those questions yet, but that's very much that sort of retrospective line of questioning, of looking at something that was supposed to happen and it didn't happen. It was a much more of the moment way to do this as well. Perhaps you saw an inconsistency in pre-hearing questions. You're raising an issue that the committee has like 0 idea about, which is totally realistic and is, again, like not crazy. Again, like council members and their staff are like humans. And so they may not know what you know. I think this is good for tone setters and government knowers, the ability to bring something that may have escaped the committee's attention to them can be really, really powerful. Perspective, you can lay the groundwork for something that you want funded or defunded in the upcoming budget. Again, pretty good for supporters and for the government knowers. That might be a tee up for saying, I'm trying to think of something useful, of like, we want to see, trying to stay out of like the study realm because I know everybody hates studies, right? But we want to see, even if that's like a I don't know, more affordable housing, right? Everybody likes more affordable housing, but you will need to talk about how to fund the Housing Production Trust Fund, right? Or emergency rental assistance, or HPAP, or sorry, down payment assistance program. So oversight testimony, rather than asking for dollars for that or saying it should have more money, you know, that's a great budget ask, but that's not a good oversight ask. So you'll want to provide clear context and actual details and a real example of why this thing is either good or bad in the case that you might want to defund it, and like why it is that and why you can follow that up with a budget request, or you don't have to. So those are kind of the ways that I generally think about this, and I try to keep myself to these, like one of these three things, or just like make it very clear when I'm switching between one or the other, because you will blur them together ultimately. So you will notice that none of these is how dare you, which is really tempting to say, but I urge you, do not recreate the Sally Cat meme. Do not be this person. Do not be screaming at a council member, I cannot believe you did this. Screw this agency. How dare you? They'll kind of look at you like the salad cat because they're governing professionals. This counts for agencies that you may think are the enemy. It's really easy to get frustrated with DDOT. It's really easy to get mad at DHCD for the way that the Housing Production Trust Fund works. I get it, but do not say, how dare you? It's not helpful. So what is actually good testimony? I would say that in general, some of the best performance oversight examines the relationships between parts of an agency and what's happening under the director. The director is being asked questions. They may not know everything that's going on in their agency. Again, that's not crazy. If you work in a mid to large organization, like the CEO or the boss is not going to know every single intimate detail. That's why performance oversight is a little bit more like an organizational review, not a review of a single person or action. Council and public witnesses like us can kind of serve as management consultants at our best, which is a weird way to put it, but being able to sort of come in and identify issues and give specific information about them can be really helpful. So I also think you'll kind of know it when you see it, right? I feel really good at my job when a council member asks a government witness a version of a question that I might have put into my testimony. This is certainly not exclusive to me. Sometimes council members will review public testimony and put that into their prep for the agency. So to the benefit of submitting your testimony early is to help inform some of those questions that staff write for their bosses. But you know, don't expect obvious questions to be asked. Don't expect a council member just to say, how dare you, or castigate an agency. So, you know, that generally, if you hear sort of tones that you've included in your testimony in a council member's remarks, then like, even if they're not asking you questions or talking about your testimony specifically, I think you can feel pretty good about yourself. So these are some older examples. I wasn't like super jazzed about them, but you know, something that is good in terms of like question format is to stick with sort of factual questions, not leaning too hard into the like, is it true that, like, you may have your biases and preferences about agencies and how they're working. You may have had a really bad experience with the DC government. Asking leading questions is not particularly helpful. You kind of want government witnesses to talk as much as possible and provide as much detail as possible in their own responses, right? So asking questions that elicit factual responses, like, for example, for the Department of Public Works, how many booting and towing crews have we had in the past and how many do we have now, right? Those are concrete numbers that you could include, or like that is a question seeking concrete numbers that you could include in your testimony, and maybe something that a council member would ask, right? Why is it necessary to add categories in 311? That's a thing that happens. It is true that the categories in 311 are limited and something has to be in a category to file a 311 request. How is it possible to add a category? Why is it necessary to do this for certain things like fake license plates, right? These are questions that can elicit a more factual response. They are, I think, genuinely curious, which is really, really valuable, as opposed to just sort of saying, like trying to get an agency to confirm your priors. So again, you're not asking questions, but these are certainly materials that you can include in your testimony, maybe something that council members will pick up on. You can even say in your testimony, I request that the committee ask the agency this kind of question, right? And that may work its way into a council member's line of questioning. So that's sort of my big overall rundown of stuff. Before I get into actually how to sign up, is there any questions about any of the content that I just presented? And feel free to just unmute yourself and talk, since we have a small group, which is awesome. I can keep talking, but it would be better if you asked questions. Everybody good? Okay, I will talk about hearing management.
Alex,
yeah.
one question, Alex. It's Frank. I was just wondering about, I know you're going to talk about the process to register. However, you already reviewed the the previous, or excuse me, the prelude before the hearing to submit witness testimony and or register. And my question here is, is it better to get, if I'm bringing a few of my neighbors to testify in front of the ABCA, it's under the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration on the 31st. And I want to let them know, because they're very busy, should they best, if they're not going to show up, should they submit written testimony 48 hours before? Would that give it, so these are people who aren't going to show up, but just are going to submit written comments. Is it best, like, what's the timing for that type of participation?
Yeah, for sure. So if you are submitting written testimony and not testifying in person, I generally try to stick to the at least 24 hours before the hearing rule. If people can do it earlier, like that's great, in part because then they're done, right? They don't have to worry about it. But I feel like 24 hours in advance is a pretty standard thing to expect for all written testimony. If they aren't able to do it in advance, the record will stay open for a period of time following the hearing. It varies by committee, which means it varies by the agency. So if someone is both unable to testify and can't get their testimony written before the hearing, they'll usually have, I would say, like 5 days to 2 weeks after any hearing. You have to check the hearing specifically, or check the agency and the committee specifically, to submit something. But I do recommend doing it in advance, because it does get a little bit more, it gets more eyes on it, right? Like the committee staff is more likely to see it in advance of the hearing. The council member may see it in advance of the hearing, and that can help inform their lines of questioning.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything else before I keep going? Okay. So there used to be this insanely awful process for signing up to testify. This was basically this combination of checking a PDF, emailing a committee email address, saying in a sentence that you wanted to testify, maybe there was a Google form. There's a new hearing management system. I am so pleased to present I don't work for the DC government. I'm just really excited about this. HTTPS lims.dccouncil.gov/hearings. I don't know. Go to the link if you're on your computer at home, and then you can see the hearing management system. I do want to give you a disclaimer. Finding information on when hearings are happening and how to testify at them is kind of a mess right now. As excited as I am about the hearing management system, it is sort of in beta. It's not fully integrated into stuff on the rest of the council website. So do keep that in mind. To show this to you, you go to basically to dccouncil.gov. Go to hearings. Go to HMS. This accesses the hearing management system. You can see it. It's really nice. It's really pretty. I'm quite a big fan of it. You can even do it in calendar view. So what is listed on here is basically the committees and when they're meeting. We're on the 24th. That's why it says that. If you want to know more, you can click. So you can see that this is the Public Works and Operations Committee. There's an oversight hearing. It's on Tuesday, January 30th at 2 p.m. There is a room for it, but it's also, there's going to be a virtual, everything is hybrid. So, and you can see the hearing details if you click. So we'll do that in a new tab. I am, by the way, one of the 3 participants in the Department of For-Hire Vehicles oversight hearing, in case you were wondering. So this takes you to the page, basically, that includes information on the hearing. You can register to testify up here. You can also use this button to submit testimony. I'll go through this in the slides as well. This hearing notice includes kind of just what you need to see. This is boilerplate information, but it's specific to DC Council stuff. And what is in the rest of this PDF is mostly just the public hearing schedule. So this is, you'll see this throughout like the rest of this presentation. This more specific information is available up here. If you're registering to testify, you just click the button and fill out the form. It's so much easier than it used to be, which is really exciting. If you're submitting testimony, there's a couple of different options for doing this. You can, if you're registered, you do this. You can also send in a record of your testimony. You can type in your testimony directly, or you can upload a PDF. This should be fairly straightforward. All of you are logged into a Zoom call, so I trust that you have some expertise to figure this out. But I am pretty pleased with the sort of greater level of detail that has been provided for this. So, you know, again, you can sort of look at what's happening. This is the Business and Economic Development Committee. It's a performance oversight hearing. And the CBED Committee, which is Committee on Business and Economic Development, is doing all the agencies under its purview on the 31st. So, you know, again, your mileage may vary per committee. Everyone does things differently. So back to this sort of rundown again. HMS is new. There's going to be some things to toy around with it. Do avoid the sort of old council calendar. It's wonky. It's likely to be phased out. The calendar that I just showed you on HMS actually does not even feed from the same source on that. So just it's dumb. I agree. So as to not get yourself confused, just stick with using the HMS. So that's dccouncil.gov/hearings. I kind of walked through how to do that, how to sign up, and how to submit your testimony. Yes, thank you, Garrett. Someone who has a lot of expertise with this. And it's also better than hunting down a bunch of different Google forms, which a lot of the committees were shifting to, but it was harder to find the links sometimes. You can see sort of witness list and testimony, but you're usually only going to see the witness list after the hearing, if I recall correctly. And the testimony needs to be reviewed by the committee before it's posted. So it won't be live immediately after you submit it, but you are submitting something to the public record. So it will be there. If you don't want something submitted to the public record, don't submit a comment. Don't submit testimony. You know, just keep in mind that this is the public record.
Excuse me, Alex.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I want to get this question in before I
Yeah.
go. Looking at one of those forms you were showing us as an example, where you could select between live testimony and testimony.
Mhm.
You mean you can submit like video testimony?
You may be able to. I have not done that before, but that's been an option for previous hearings. So let me go back to this page. Or not previous hearings, or I'm sorry, is that in the past it has been possible to submit recorded testimony. I think,
Or was that like audio?
yeah.
Okay.
So I think this just means testimony for the record as opposed to testimony that you will deliver live.
Oh,
So I would stick with written testimony. Probably a little bit easier on your part as well.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions I can get for you before you're out the door?
No, it's been- and here to rest. Yeah.
Well, I will be sure to get you the recording. Thank you for being here, Graylin, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Of course. There is also, I had sort of skipped over in this presentation, pre-hearing questions because quite frankly, I'm sort of confused as to where they live now. They used to be on this page. I mentioned these a couple of times. These are the testimony that allowed, this is the questions submitted to agencies by committees in advance that they could give responses to. So typically this would be under this performance oversight page, which you get to by going to the council, scrolling down here, going to performance oversight and clicking here. So if you're in 2023, I'll continue to use T&E as an example. You could go here to find these performance oversight responses and some required forms. So these are rich texts. There's a ton of information in here. These are questions, again, that the committee is asking agencies in advance. So I do recommend that people read these. I sort of slow walked that in this, because I am sort of having trouble seeing where these are being uploaded. I think the plan is for this to ultimately be on these hearing pages, but I am having trouble finding them. So this is something that I will get to you in a follow-up email once I do some checking around about where pre-hearing question responses are living now, since I do place a lot of weight on those as ways to make your testimony compelling. So that's why I was kind of not being super specific about that. I will try to find the answer and get back to you on that. But for the most part, going forward, you'll want to stick with these hearing management system pages for where things are going, even if they're not like super up to date so far. And this is if you're in the list view instead of the calendar view. And you can always contact the committees, which we'll talk about in a second. Bernard, you got your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Alex. I had like 2 quick questions, which I maybe hope can set the table for you to talk about something that picks up where you just presented on. First, what do you think are some of the gaps in the performance and like oversight information, both the questions that are asked by the council and the information that's provided by agencies? And then correspondingly, what do you think are pieces of information or data or lived experience or anecdote that advocates should bring to the table when sharing their thoughts on what the council and agency should do?
Yeah, totally. Good questions on both accounts. Let me work my way backwards to one of these. So this is not like the world's most sophisticated slide. There's some stuff here that is helpful. I would say the gaps in the questions that are asked vary substantially committee to committee, right? Because again, 13 different council members. They all have their own staff. There's, oh God, I forget how many committees there are. And not that many, not as many as 13. And everybody does things differently. So the gaps can present themselves in different ways, right? Like some committees have staff who are really into the subject matter of the committee, and they are like, it's kind of like really intimate for them. They know the issues really well. They're personally interested in them. You have some staff who are really, really technically proficient, maybe less on the subject matter expertise, right? Not everyone's going to know everything, which is like totally fine by me. So if you are, and in DC, right, the council does rotate its committees. Their committees can change every 2 years, which is the length of the council period. So sometimes there is some shifting around, and staff do not stay with committees. So that is sort of a baked in gap, is that like there's not consistent committee staff. Unlike, I think people are used to this at the federal government, where like committee staff are just, they're committee staff. So that's one sort of obvious gap. But again, it can vary by committee. So there is both the like subject matter expertise that you may need to backfill for committees a little bit. There are also just maybe like questions that are a little bit more, I guess, governmenty, right? Because government employees are writing them for government agencies. And that can also, like, there may be some sort of like missing questions about lived experience for sure, which kind of leads into your second question, is like what you can do is share that lived experience. It can be very plain and simple. Linking it to a structural concern is helpful if you can, but you don't have to, right? And I think that brings it back to this like tone setter type, right? Is that like you're thinking about something, you don't totally know the solution, but you do want to present the information. So data can have a role in that, anecdote can have a role in that. You can kind of use what you have, right? I think the key here is being like sincere and transparent about where you got something and like not trying to, I don't think people really do this, but like not exaggerating it to make a point, because like the point is that you are showing up and talking about the thing. Like that in itself is a pretty strong point. Does that make sense?
No, that makes total sense. I think maybe the one other thing I'd love to get your thoughts on is, what do you think agencies, when they present or share in this process, don't necessarily do well, or what have been like your worst like horror stories of non-transparency?
Yeah, I think agencies, well, just governments in general, are hyper risk averse. They have to be, right? Because like they don't want to get sued, and I get it. But I think like the sort of worst thing an agency can do is not be self-reflexive, by which I mean not be a little bit forward thinking to understand like what some of their responses may sound like to the audience that they're delivering it to, right? So if they are presenting their responses to a council member who's really hammered them on a particular issue before, and they don't come prepared with the like kind of thing that either puts them ahead of that or is somewhat like honest and transparent, then like that, it's not great. I mean, part of the dynamic is also, right, is that like this is the legislative branch and they are testifying, or and who is testifying is employed by the executive branch. There are two different branches of government. And you don't want to, like, it would be bad form, right, for an agency to basically criticize their boss, the mayor. So agencies have a really like tough line to walk with this as well. And I am certainly sympathetic. But providing like genuine details on their programs can be really helpful. And that may mean that like agency directors and like their legislative affairs staff like may need to talk to program staff in a way that they're not typically used to. I think DDOT has improved measurably at this in previous years. I think DHCD is not too bad at it, honestly. But it's still a really hard thing for agencies to not come off as like totally insincere and uncaring when they are basically trying not to like undermine their boss, who is the mayor.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I am sympathetic, even if I myself get annoyed when that happens. So the last thing I will say is that the official schedule for this, if you are having trouble with the hearing management system, is this PDF that I've provided a link for. Not that. We can just put you here. This gets updated like about every Tuesday, and this is the really like check if you have any big questions, because things may change. Agencies may need to move their hearings. They're human, they have their own schedules to deal with. But this is where you can check to see like what is happening. And this is going to be like the sort of backup, definite like final thing. So this is linked in this slide deck, which I will show. This also includes sort of where things will be streamed. And so one thing I was going to check at the end. Yeah, so this is your sort of backup for dates. And it's kind of your primary source for that. And this is on most of those hearing management system pages for individual hearings, if you have any questions.
Alex,
Yeah.
I remember seeing, I think it was at the beginning of that schedule, that agenda document, that it said at the end of this schedule, you can see how specifically to submit comments and timing in the record. There was some piece provision, description here, but where can you best find out about those, the timelines we're talking about? Like that, the schedule will be open, the record will be open for 2 more weeks after the hearing, or that you have to submit registration 24 hours before the hearing. Where is all that?
Yeah, so this is some of the information that's gotten like lost in this transition to HMS, which is
okay. So I'm sorry, you went over this, I think, already, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because last year, the last time I did this training, like you would basically, as you identified, scroll to the end of this PDF and there would be like 5 more pages of instruction on like what each committee wanted. So that's something that I will be sure to follow up on. Bye, Garrett. Thank you for coming. And make sure that I have like a detailed answer for you, because it has also honestly been like confusing me. So I do stick to the general like rule of thumb, right, of register more than 24 hours in advance and like just submit your testimony to the record as soon as possible. Ideally, like again, before the hearing, like it's good practice, it's good form. But it is also a like, yeah, this transition is kind of rocky. So
all right, I hear you. Thank you. And then my other question is, what would a person, you provided like a 3-level array of folks who will come before and testify. All right, the 3 types of persons, the beginning to the expert. Who, like for positions 1 and 2, like a newbie and a person with some experience, where do you see, since most of us don't bring to the table a figure, a number for the budget. We don't have a program and say, we ask you to fund this $200,000 project. How best can we participate in that budget hearing at a level 1 or medium level without having an expertise and bringing a budget figure and a program to the table?
Yeah, well, this is good fodder for the budget testimony that I'll ultimately put together. But the sort of link to Oversight actually is like one way that you can sort of start in on that without knowing a number, and you don't need to know a number for things, right? Is submitting Oversight testimony before you do your budget testimony to work on identifying the issue, right? So that you are sort of advocating for this thing that you're interested in. That may be something super specific to your neighborhood, like it may be a program that you want to see, whatever it is. It will be helpful to be able to point to Oversight testimony where you're not even talking about money, but sort of identifying the problem and talking about it from an administrative and performance standpoint. So then you can follow that up with your budget testimony and say, I would like this funded when the council is in its budget deliberations. You don't need to know a number. What you can do, and I'll get more into this like when I do a budget training, which I'm trying to figure out if I can do it in late February, maybe early March, is start reading the budget and get a sense of comparable items. But you don't even have to go like that in detail. You can just say, I think this is important and I would support it being funded.
Yes, that's very good advice. Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you for the program you did in this exact matter 2 years ago, because I've been testifying in front of ABCA, the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration, for 2 years. And so it's really affecting my neighborhood. So I feel I've made such a bigger impact. And it's all because of this, especially, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Frank. Can I like ask you if you have any specific examples that you can share? Because I'm curious.
Well, I testified twice, and it's interesting. The first time 2 years ago that I testified, there was only five citizens from the entire district who have complaints about how ABCA is working, and so that's very surprising to me, because anybody who lives in a mixed use area or what they might call a nightlife area, it's very surprising. Last year there was only two persons, so just strangely that not enough people participate, and everybody complains all the time. As we know, government's very slow. It's given me, because I volunteer on the ANC, on the alcohol committee, so it's just giving me a lot of fodder to parlay the skills here that I've learned onto the ANC, and giving me just much more depth of understanding of the agency, and then also based on the questions that have been submitted. I mean, you get such a great understanding of the budgets, what's being funded, and it's been an amazing amalgam of pieces here that are coming together for me. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it's super fun for me to hear stuff like that, and it is totally true that like everybody complains and then very few people show up to hearings, which is kind of just like complaining is cathartic sometimes. But yeah, like there is a public forum. It happens once a year. You can air your grievances in a constructive way. I know Garrett had to jump, but I want to elevate like something that he said, which is that even just asking for in oversight testimony for something to happen faster by sort of looking at what a timeline is, and this is back to oversight, not budget, but looking at a project timeline and saying, I would like this to happen sooner, or this was supposed to be completed by this time and it hasn't been delivered. Identifying that and asking a committee to go into detail on that is also a way to sort of nudge things along and can be really useful. So I do want to elevate that. That is like, I'm glad we're in discussion territory because I was talking a lot and I had to drink some water. But is there anything else I can answer? I'm happy to be on for as long as people need. And like, again, this will be available, but feel free to discuss or whatever, or go on with your evenings, whatever is helpful for you.
Alex, if nobody else has a question, this is just sort of a periphery question, but it has to do with tone, and I'm a person who gets excited and want to see change, and am sort of dumbfounded why things are so bad in certain areas, and particularly around alcohol enforcement and now cannabis enforcement, because we're like one of the only jurisdictions in the country that allows a now what they're registering medical marijuana, right? They're expanding the medical marijuana program and going to get rid of all of the so-called I-71s shops, the illegal, what we call them illegal, but the gray market of, giving gifts. But nowhere else in the country do they allow schools within 400 feet. But we have, because nobody's involved in this process in the city, because everybody's so busy, we've allowed these new registrations for the legal expanded medical program to show up with less than 400 feet from a school if that shop, that medicinal shop, is within a mixed use commercial corridor. So there's this loophole, and so it just really aggravates me, and I get all excited and upset. So I appreciate your and I take this enthusiasm to all of my work with ABCA. But my question to you is, where do you, I mean, that's always been my problem. Where do you convey your anger or inability to believe, all of the bad part and how it needs to change yesterday? Where do you put that energy in this process? Or that's a separate life, right? I mean, right? Is that what I'm saying? Right? I think
Well, I mean,
I'm
in some ways, yeah, I think it is. And like, again, I feel so incredibly lucky to have the job that I do, and that I am able to do what I do full time. Like that is just like an enormous, like, I am very grateful for my job, right? Because otherwise I would be doing this as an extracurricular, because I work on the issues that I care about. But I think, I've said this to before, one of actually, like, I mean, just to talk about it, right? Like, one of my favorite things to do is actually to present to students, right? Like, I love talking to people who are interested in doing this, and they're figuring stuff out in school, and they're thinking about how to make it a career. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give is usually like, this is not my entire personality, and it shouldn't be yours either, even though it is my full-time job, and I try to find something rewarding like outside of that, right? Even if it's just like reading about the issues or like going on a walk in my neighborhood, that has been sort of instrumental in sort of getting me out of my own head about things. I will be honest, there's been certain points in time where I've gone to like 2 solid core classes a day because I have been very stressed, and it's better than sitting angrily by my computer. But that may be unhealthy in its own way. But like, Frank, I definitely take your point, is that it is really easy to get super jazzed about something to the point that like it is all consuming. And like, I have definitely spent like 12 hours on like researching certain things, and like sometimes that work is really good and I'm really proud of it, and I have seen it make an impact over time, and I just remind myself that I can do that and I can do other things too. So that's more of an existential question, but I think it does play into this because it does sometimes feel like pretty hopeless. But that kind of brings me back to my point of like not trying to do everything in one testimony, and knowing that you do have sort of year over year and multiple opportunities to do this. And I think it's great that you're involved in your ANC, because that's another platform. Like, I've certainly seen you at some of our events, which is great, and I love it. Like, that goes for everyone who's on this call, not just Frank, is that like, diversifying your interests, as it were, and having things to do outside of your participation in local government can really help. And it gives you fodder for testimony that you might ultimately submit. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. If no one else has anything, I'm happy to wrap it up. My email, I will put in the chat, but I think everyone has it. It's abaca@ggwash.org. This is recorded. Like I said, we will post it. I will post my slide deck. We have a happy hour at Grand Duchess in Adams Morgan on Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. Some of you have been to this. I have them every other month. Come by, hang out, have a drink. Duchess will be serving food earlier than usual, which is great. We'll have a couple of other things coming up. Like I said, I'm going to work on a budget training, but don't have a confirmed date yet. Let me know if you have any questions. If you want me to review your testimony, I'm more than happy to. And I'll send a follow-up email with some of the outstanding questions that I have myself. So thank you so much for being here. I hope it was helpful, and I hope to see you all soon. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Actually, I did have one other question come to mind.
Okay.
I know, like, from previous experience in state government, there are often some like performance reports that are required for like an agency to do.
Yeah.
Does that only exist via like those pre-hearing questions, or is that?
Yeah, there's a big variety. So those pre-hearing questions contain a lot of stuff, and typically there will be questions in there about like ostensibly ongoing work or reporting.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't. Like, sometimes that is really up to I guess like the quality of the staffing on the committee, and sometimes staff don't know, or their predecessors didn't fill them in well, or whatever, right? So there's also like different agencies being under different committees have different reporting requirements at different times. This is actually, I'm gonna see if I can find this. The agencies that I work the most with, including which include like DDOT, DHCD, Office of Planning. Here we go. This was pretty interesting. I only know this because I was like looking at this recently. This is an example. This is DOE's childhood-led screening report. This is actually a really good example of something that is required by statute of an agency that they do yearly that you can like track and find. Other agencies, and this is just like, I actually saved this because I thought it was a really interesting example. Like agencies that I work with more often don't have a ton of stuff like this. So it is kind of contingent on those reporting being required by law, right? And then a committee sort of continually following up on that. Although ostensibly like the law compels the executive to submit it, which is what has happened in this case. So it is very much another year mileage may vary situation by department. So like if you're looking at like gov, like no, I don't want that. Like you can sort of, there's a lot of stuff in DDOT's like projects and programs, and there's not necessarily like a clear place for reporting and like where that would live. Like there's some stuff that's required by this, which is this like state level transportation improvement planning. It's not consistent reporting. Like DHCD is sort of in a similar boat where like there's
well, that's that's numbers.
Yeah, I'm giving you this whole like, you know, rundown of stuff because it is like, this is how much it varies like agency by agency. So like I both like enjoy those, and it's also like really hard to communicate sometimes of like, yeah, like it would be really nice if there were consistent reporting and it were all in one place, but there's not. So these are some of these like TOPA filings, which is our Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act, which like goes through DHCD. Those are weekly. Like some of these are on here that you can check, but it really, again, it varies like agency by agency, and the examples are kind of like all over the map. So it's a really good question, and ostensibly like if everything is working, going to plan, those pre-hearing questions should be checking on and asking about like any consistent reporting required by law of an agency within a committee. Again, that is sometimes up to the skill level of the committee staff, which is usually pretty high, but that's also a really great question as a public witness if you aren't seeing that in the pre-hearing questions, or if like, even if you do see it, but you as a resident have a question, right? And you're like, should there be consistent reporting on this? Like that's like an issue that I'm raising to the committee in my oversight testimony. That like that's a good thing to, I think, like raise as a question. Reporting, as you know, is not always the answer, but for some things it can be really helpful.
Yeah, this is the current hobby horse of like, we had a meeting with, I'm in Ward 3, and we had a meeting with Fruman over the weekend, or he hosted this meeting, and came to this sort of realization of like, we don't, the mayor has this like big climate plan that came out this year, and I have not a ton of confidence in the administration's ability to execute, but at the very least it would be nice to, we put out all these goals, how are we progressing towards them? So I asked the council member, like, do you guys get reporting on progress towards climate goals? And the answer was no. So I'm trying to track down and find like what is out there now, but maybe these hearings are a good opportunity to poke around that.
Yeah, were you talking about sustainable DC?
Yes, yeah, whatever the big plan that just came out.
Yeah, so both, yeah, I have let's see. did they update this? Is there a 3.0 or is this still in like update time? I'll use 2.0 as an example because I actually use this all the time as like your plan says this and you should do this. So I know you're familiar with this, but like looking in this, right, is like, if I remember correctly, they've like set this up in a way that is just like for the purposes of oversight, like really easy to gank things, which is like awesome. I actually really, really, really like Sustainable DC as a planning document. Because like all of these, even just like these target baselines, right, is like these are questions for oversight, right? It's like, is there a wetland registry? Did this happen? Were 150 acres of wetlands in targeted conservation opportunity areas planted and maintained? Like, if so, where? If not, which ones weren't? Which developers were partnered with to incorporate living shorelines? Where are the living shorelines? Reduce threats to 75 aquatic species. I don't know, that seems kind of like a reach goal. But like, how many aquatic species had threats reduced, right? So as a planning document, like this is such a really, really like great example of like how to go through an existing document and turn those into questions, because like the content is already there for you, right? As for like the progress reports, which I guess many people have Googled this because that's the first thing I can definitely type, is like they do exist. They may not be exactly what you want to see, but like these do exist, and that also provides a sort of like fodder for questions, right? Is like if you're looking at these reports and you don't find them to be specific, like sufficient and include what you want to see, or if it's just like not doing it for you, right? Like you can use these as a basis to ask. So Sustainable DC does have reporting and it's pretty decent, but like not as like not everything is set up in this fashion, and maybe more things should be set up. And I haven't like gone through this with a red pen or anything, but maybe there are things in here that are prompting more questions that you have.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. This is super, super helpful.
You're welcome. I'm glad you chose a plan that I was familiar with.
Maybe some overlap in interests within this group.
Yeah, totally. And you know, with Sustainable DC, I am like, I feel like I spend a lot of time with the transportation section because it is just a very rich text. And you know, again, just as like an example, once you get past like all the graphics, right, like the way this is set up is like you can even ask questions about this structure, right? Like obviously like Sustainable DC is being revised then for 3.0, right? But like this is like, should the target baseline for expanding high capacity transit on high ridership corridors, like should it be higher or lower? Like something I can testify on is like, I think this target baseline, like, or this is the target one baseline, so it's like kind of the fact, right? But this is the like, I think this should increase by 75% instead of 50%. And that's like what I'm saying in my testimony.
Yes, or maybe reflect that COVID happened and commuting is not the only.
Yeah, and community is not the only thing. Like that's a huge issue with like planning stuff, right? Is like commuter trips are used because that's what the American Community Survey has. So that's how you can, that's what those target baselines are based on. And so like there may be a bigger question here. There's always bigger questions of like, what is DOE using for trip data that is not dependent on American Community Survey data, which only counts commute data. It does not count non-commute trips. There's literally not a question about that. So like, there is just like so many different ways you can take these in so many different directions. And that's one of the like, I don't know, I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Frank, for hanging on. Let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise have a great night.
Yeah. Good night again. Thanks.
Yeah, good night.